After being put to work in Washington farms to supply the nation, in both peace and war, conflict arose when farm workers joined together to fix the poor conditions placed by the growers and farmers who hired them. After nearly a century of struggle for the laborers, the United Farm Workers established a Washington state chapter and successfully brought forth the Compromise of the Farmers. This story begins in the 1870s, as farming sprouts in the Washington Territory, before statehood in 1889. The very first farm laborers were mostly composed of Native Americans, while hops became the territory's first major cash crop, a flower used in the production of beer. Even before the 20th century, the native farm workers showed this pleasure in working in hop fields. It was not until 1905 when the first organization that concerned farm workers appeared in the United States. The Industrial Workers of the World, or the IWW, extended membership to Eastern Washington in 1910. In that same year, however, the Mexican Revolution and Civil War began, causing huge migration into the U.S. World War I raged on, taking the lives of many. Resources were greatly valued in the country, including farm produce. Any attempt to unionize was hampered under the Espionage Act, an act making the interference of wartime industrial production illegal. Federal officials often raided IWW meetings, but time soon passed and the Great War had ended. 10 years later, the United States began deporting over 500,000 Mexicans and Mexican Americans. As immigrants working in farm labor feared deportation, tensions rose between farmers and the workers. In August 24, 1933, roughly 100 strikers were met with 250 armed growers at Congdon Orchards. This event would be known as the Battle of Congdon Orchards. Although this was shocking to some, this was only one example of the hostility that farmers were willing to impose. As the nation plunged into yet another world war, men were drafted into battle, and the necessity of farm workers became apparent. In 1942, Mexico and the U.S. initiated the Bracero program, a program to bring Mexican citizens to the United States for agricultural work. And 3 years after that, those who participated picketed around the nation over low wages and long hours. Over the next several years, very little progress could be made, but by 1970, the Chicano civil rights movement tied with the farm workers movement, as most were Hispanic, and the United Farm Workers, or UFW, a union created in California, allocated efforts to help the Northwest. Through combined efforts, they could organize strikes that would capture the attention of mass media. The strikes were planned against hop fields, as the conditions for those farms were worse than any other. However, hop strikes were met with violence, including the use of guns. Growers prevented the success of hop boycotters by surface bargaining, never following through with their agreement to cooperate with them. Meanwhile, some of the Mexican foremen did not agree with the UFW and gave the farmers aid on how to stop the union. It was clear that the movement was slipping. The 80s ensued, and much of the progress made in the 60s and 70s had been removed. Fortunately, leaders of the Chicano civil rights movement did not give up on the workers. The goal became to inform them of their rights. Several farm workers could not read, so the best way to distribute information was using radio. Although the foundation of a radio station began on 1975, they would not be granted a license until October of 1979 with the call letters KDNA for the word cadena, Spanish for chain. KDNA 91.9 FM aired their first program in December of 1979. But many began to call them by a different name, La Voz del Campesino, the voice of the farm worker. Although some programs were in Spanish for Hispanic immigrants, many programs did play in English for other ethnic communities, and by the early 80s, there were over 80,000 listeners. Programs would focus on consumer, nutrition, and food information, as well as women's rights, immigration, unemployment, and labor issues, and more. As more and more people migrated from the dangerous state of Central and South America, the Immigration and Naturalization Service began finding undocumented farm workers in Washington and raiding local communities. When more workers were hired to replace those lost, it only prompted more INS raids. To counteract these actions, Radio KDNA formulated a procedure to warn workers of raids. By dedicating a song to target towns, occupants would know to leave in time. KDNA transformed into the core for Washington's immigrant farm worker community, and by standing with them, the radio station became known nationwide for their impact. Because of its role in bringing back a steady motion in the farm workers movement, this led the way for the Washington chapter of the UFW. The radio station had a social service center titled El Centro Campesino, or the Farm Worker Center. While KDNA brought people into the center, they discussed the topic of forming a Washington UFW branch. One man, however, would be pivotal in the future of the movement: Thomas Villanueva. He was well known for his background with farm worker activism and influence as an organizer. For this, members of the UFW cooperated with Villanueva in the mid-80s.
We needed a union, but I was kind of convinced to run in for it as president. I said, well, you are the one that can make it go and all that, and So I talked to my wife and my sons those times, and my sons were little. I think my wife thinks it was unfair that I asked them. But they all agreed, well, that's what you have always wanted to be. You won't be happy unless you get back into it. I get this call about 11:30 in the morning, and asked me in a pretty rough way, "Are you Thomas Bonavia?" I said, "Yeah." "Understand you form a union?" "Yeah." "I want to know where you're located because I want to come and beat the heck out of you." So, okay. I should actually tell you, I was with the Special Forces of the Brown Berets in Vietnam. And I want to come and beat the heck out of you. He said, "Well, I tell you what, where do you live?" I said, "Sunnyside." He said, "Well, Sunnyside is only 15 minutes away from Granger. This is the exact location." And I told him. I says, "I have a meeting at 1 o'clock in Yakima." I said, "But it's 11:30. I says, "I'm willing to be late to my meeting, and I'll wait for you till 12:45. I said, "That gives you a little over an hour." He never showed up. I think he was just trying to, to intimidate me.
The Washington State United Farm Workers conducted their first strike at Pyramid Orchards in 1987. Growers and farmers joined to stop the union and created the Washington Growers League. However, Villanueva responded to this by hosting a radio talk show with KDNA and giving information about the progress. He urged the public to show up and support the Pyramid Orchards strike, which many did. First starting with only 60 workers, the strike had accumulated 2,000 protesters. With the overwhelming encouragement, the strike was a success. What followed afterwards was illustrated by progress. Not only did the strikes of the UFW succeed in creating unions and negotiations, but it had become an influence in law. Farmers attempted to fight against the strikers in the court of law, but with very little gain. When farm workers united to fix the substandard conditions of the fields, conflict came as the farmers opposed them. Although many decades had passed without much success from the workers, they did not give up. What should not be forgotten is their struggle, which would induce the farmers to compromise out of necessity and bring rights and regulation to the once undermined position of the farm workers of the Northwest.